Good evening, I'm Vikram Oza, and tonight on The Big Question, we're asking something that India has debated for decades now, but never with this kind of urgency. So now India is the world's fastest growing major energy market. Our demand for oil and gas will keep rising for at least the next 20 years. And yet, we import close to 90% of what we actually consume. So every geopolitical shock, from the Middle East to Russia, Ukraine, all of the geopolitical shocks reminds us how exposed makes us in India. One tanker route blocked, one sanction tightened, our trade build literally balloons. Across the world, nations are choosing sides. The United States, under the Republicans, has done it years ago with drill, baby, drill. They've opened up exploration, they've backed entrepreneurs, they're turning an energy importer into a producer. China is locking up minerals and rare earths. Europe is scrambling for supply security. So everyone is digging in. Where does that leave India? This debate has resurfaced sharply after the comments that we've got at the NDTV conclave, and also today, this social media post on X, which you're looking at, this coming in from Vedanta chairman Anil Agarwal. He argues in this post on X that India has the resources, it has the talent, it has the cost advantage. But he says India is being held back by fear, regulation and policy uncertainty. So his message is pretty blunt in this post he's put out, that the world wants India to be a market and not a producer when it comes to energy. But critics are pushing back. They warn of the climate risks, they're talking about stranded assets, and they're questioning whether doubling down on hydrocarbons makes sense in a world that is racing towards energy transition. Which is why tonight it makes sense to ask this question. The big question tonight is whether this paradox is going to be resolved or not at this particular juncture that India finds itself in. Viksit Bharat, yes, but when it comes to energy security, are we going to drill at home or are we going to keep importing as we have? Because that too lends us in different kinds of problems. So what is the future looking like? Where the importance of hydrocarbons is falling. We're talking about energy transition. So is this going to be a costly distraction for us? Or do we need to double down on our Atmanirbharta when it comes to energy security? That's the debate that we're going to have. Let's take it across to the panel. Let me introduce you to them. Well, tonight on the show, I have Prasenjit Pal joining us. He's independent consultant and former executive director at NTPC. Sukrit Vijayakar is also with us. He's global crude expert and founder of Trifecta Consultants. Great to have you, sir. Pratyush Sinha, Senior Vice President at Loham, also with us. Great that you could join us today. Prasenjit Pal, in one line, if we can just set the tone of this debate. Short answer, should India aggressively drill domestically, or is the heavy dependence on imports going to be a simple reality?
Okay, India, as I always say, has to go for a basket approach, and therefore there's going to be local drilling as well as the international approach.
Sukrit Vijayakar, from a crude market perspective, is India better off chasing some level of self-sufficiency or shopping the world for the cheapest barrel? Is that going to be our story?
Well, India has always been chasing locally for production, and they've been doing it right from 1977, from the days of Bombay High. They haven't found it. They've gone to Rajasthan, they've gone into Gujarat, they found some gas reserves which were hopelessly overstated. The fact is that we haven't found oil. Yes, we will continue searching for oil. But right now, if we do not utilize our capacity, we will have to import diesel and gasoline, and that will make us far more dependent on the world than just importing crude oil itself.
Pratyush Sinha, from an industry and technology standpoint, does this make sense for India right now to expand oil and gas exploration today, like Vedanta chairman Anil Agarwal is suggesting in his post? Pratyush, you've muted yourself.
Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll come more from a rare earths and critical minerals point of view.
Sure.
Because when we talk about energy security, a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of our additional energy capacity that we are building in is coming from renewables and from new age sources of energy.
Yes.
So to secure that supply, again, we are dependent a lot on imports even there. Long term, what a goal should be to have as much domestic value addition as possible over there, because to keep in control our import bills. We do have a lot of raw materials when it comes to rare earths, if not for other minerals. Short to medium term, the goal should be to ensure that domestically we are collecting all the scrap and recycling, especially for metals, and we are acquiring captive assets globally.
Right.
Uh, so that we can get the material at a cost plus basis instead of buying off the market. Long term, the goal should be to explore and find assets in India and ensure that a large percentage of our demand is domestically met.
So if the future is about rare earths, it's about the magnets, then does it make sense to double down on hydrocarbons? Would that be a smart move, or is that a step backward? Prasenjit Pal, what do you say? Because I'm looking at domestic production of oil, which has fallen from 36 MMT in 2014-15 to 26 MMT now. So why has not India been able to increase output despite all the policy tweaks we've been doing?
Actually, I'll have to answer this in two parts. One part is there is this overwhelming thought about reducing the carbon footprint. So, given a choice, everybody would like to go fully electric tomorrow. But is that possible? It is obviously not. The mobility industry is moving towards electric, but there are steps to go through. Now, in terms of oil, primarily we become dependent on oil for many of the processes and many of the kind of transportation and other industrial requirements. We've been trying to increase our oil production, yes, but there obviously are certain limitation in terms of the amount of oil available and the kind of fields that we are able to find and exploit. So the domestic production has increased a little, but it has not really gone up the way we would have liked it to go up. So again, we are dependent for energy primarily on two prongs. One is electricity and other is the oil. On the electricity front, there has been a movement. We are now trying to move away from coal-based and other hydrocarbon-based into something like nuclear and all. But yes, it will still take time. So we are in a transition phase. And while this transition goes through, in a part, we would still have to depend on both coal and oil for a substantial portion of maybe the next 20 years.
If we have to keep relying on coal and oil, at least for the next 20 years, Sukrit Vijayakar, now that India has been buying nearly 40% of crude from Russia at around $69 a barrel, it's cheaper than most suppliers. But given that, is domestic drilling even cost competitive when you're talking about that? Because even that is now being brought to question because of our trade deal with the US. But even considering that we sustain this kind of price for crude, is that going to be a competitive cost option for us to do more of domestic drilling?
Well, domestic drilling has to go on regularly. Once you find the well, you can decide whether to produce from a well or no. In the US, they have a number of drills that are going on, constantly looking for new sources. The American shale producers control the production that they make out and provide to the market. So while oil markets outside are cheaper, we should be importing. Should oil become more expensive and the cost barriers are overcome, you should be using domestic oil. So the fact that oil is available cheap today is not a reason to stop exploration, in my view.
India is claiming that it has 300 billion barrels equivalent in potential resources. From a technology perspective, from an exploration standpoint, is that something that is realistic or overly optimistic? Pratyush Sinha.
Oil and gas drilling is not my area of expertise, so I won't be able to tell you whether that number is
Fair
realistic. Yeah, but what I can certainly say is we do sit on a lot of reserves of a lot of different kinds of minerals, and a lot of exploration has only just begun. If you look at Ministry of Mines and the auctions that they've been doing, so I do hope to see a lot more mineral resources being discovered in India.
So Pratyush, when you make that comparison of where we stand on oil exploration with what we are trying to do with rare earths right now, because there's a lot of catching up to do, a lot has to be done right here, right now. For oil exploration, we are far behind. But when it comes to rare earths, that's a place where we find ourselves equally lacking, because the way China has been at it and weaponizing this entire rare earths bit, how much of India, the position that we are at, how much further do you think we have to go to be able to get self-sufficiently, even if you are looking at 20 years down the line?
So, see, when it comes to rare earths, I think there is a misconception that these minerals are rare or not found in India. India has one of the largest reserves of rare earths in the world. And India has been mining these rare earths for the last 70 odd years. So we do have a lot of these minerals. What we don't have are some specific categories of rare earths, which are only found in China, Myanmar, Laos, and some of these countries. And what we don't have is downstream processing capacity. And that is what is coming up now. Typically, a downstream processing capacity will take less time to come online than a mine getting fully operational. So uh, with rare earths, at least, if we play our cards right, there is an opportunity to get to a stage where there is sufficient self-sufficiency. For other critical minerals, we will probably need to do more exploration. And as I mentioned, in the short term, it might be better to, it might be a good idea to look at assets that are closer to production and go and have captive acquisition of them so that we can access those materials.
Right. So it's very important to get those captive material and to ensure that for the future as well, if we get our processing bits right, then the catch-up becomes that much easier. Of course, we are still far behind on the processing of it, as I understand it from earlier discussions over here on the big question as well. But Sukrit, you were making a point.
Yeah, historically, all claims about reserves have always been overstated. In the early 2000s, Reliance claimed to have found a massive gas reserve of around 22 trillion cubic feet of gas in the KG22 basin. That got muted down to 15, and then eventually what happened, I don't remember. But these are typical overstatements. It's very difficult for anybody to prove that I have the reserves say I have, but you will have reserves, even if it is 70%, 80%. Like 2/3 of your figure is a bit of an overstatement, but part of it could be mistake, part of it could be, hyperbole.
Right,
For
right.
want of a better word.
Yes, so this kind of data is something that we'll look at credible sources to be able to get. At the end of the day, we can only rely on what we have by way of numbers. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about creating self-sufficiency. And Pratyush Sinha, India claims that it has 300 million barrels equivalent in potential resources. That's that one figure that we have. But now Anil Agarwal is saying that India has just 200 active exploration licenses, when it should actually have 2,000. So is the real bottleneck policy? Is it bureaucracy? Is it fear of investors as well? Which one is true over here? If we have, by way of licenses for active exploration, only 200, why is it so few?
No, that's a good question. So I'll just take an example of what the Ministry of Mines has been trying to do along with the Ministry of Coal. The number of till around 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, we barely had any exploration going on when you looked at a lot of these minerals. And in the last year, there have been auctions of over 50 blocks. The number might be closer to 100 now. And a lot of them have received a lot of enthusiasm. I wouldn't say every asset has been mobbed up, but there's been a lot of enthusiasm over there. So it's something that the government is still figuring out, iterating on the right model that will attract investors. But I think that step has already been taken. What we do need is maybe some exploration technologies, because exploration again is something that India has not done historically very well. So probably we might want to work with, say, the Australians or the Canadians, or I don't know, a lot of these companies which have a lot of mining expertise, and bring in technology from there, invest in R&D and exploration in India, and ensure that we hit typically what you want is a good hit rate.
Correct.
So increasing that hit rate, and in a lot of cases, making a lot of the data available democratically, so that more minds can work on that data, because you have all these different kinds of tools available now,
right,
but the data is often not available. And again, that's something that the government has started to do, but I think we'll start to see results over time.
Mr. Pal, what do you think? Where the potential lies and where we are at when it comes to exploration, and from your own perspective, India is constantly, by way of the pricing, if you consider taxation, the contract regime, does it make long-term exploration attractive or unattractive for private players, for that kind of investments to come in to drive this?
Actually, you see, what is very important is most of the mines which were easily accessible, whether it is an oil well or a coal mine or any kind of mine for that matter, has already been exploited. What remains now are mines in rather remote areas. So obviously, matter of accessibility, the cost involved in exploring that mine and the cost involved in exploiting that resource is going to be fundamental to business, because no private sector, or for that matter, government sector or any sector, would like to go in for a business that would be, right from day one, a loss-making proposition. So therefore, the location of the mines and the availability of the resources is very important. As for the taxation and other things are concerned, the policies are enabling.
Okay.
But the problem is the business needs to come forward and do it. And while cheaper sources may be available across the world, it wouldn't normally make a common business sense to sort of go into a high cost exploration area. But then, talking in terms of long-term energy security for the country, long-term mineral security for the country, I think we have to explore these resources and keep them ready so that as and when the international price jumps, as was being made out, we should be able to switch over to domestic. So that is the kind of preparation that we need to take.
But it's not just about the price jumps. You're talking about geopolitical instability as well, which is what the finance minister in the conclave that we had in Delhi over the weekend as well is constantly highlighting that domestic factors are looking very strong. But she is very concerned about any kind of shocks, which would be global in nature and external in nature. We are also joined by Ajay Shankar, Distinguished Fellow from TERI, the Energy and Resource Institute. Great to have you with us, Mr. Shankar. Glad you could make the time, but tell us, because globally investment is moving towards renewables. So then the question is also whether we are risking stranded assets by pushing exploration, even if we were to do it, even if we want to cover ourselves for the next 20 years, would we be compromising on what we really require beyond the 20 years when the world is actually trying to pivot away from fossil fuels?
I think you have raised a very pertinent issue, because we need to take a long-term view and undertake a net present value calculation, assuming that we will reach net zero by 2070. So if we are going to be net zero by 2070, if transport will move into electricity at the rate at which it is going, and if the hydrogen economy succeeds, then we need to do a very careful calculation of what our projected demand would be and what the demand would be depending on the prices of the alternatives. So if you look at the situation right now, for two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, and even buses, electric mobility is a better option. If you look at the railways, they've done 100% electrification. So we need a very careful consideration of the long-term net present value costs before we jump into very expensive, lumpy capital investments or long-term contracts. This is the first principle. Going further, I would say that in terms of energy security, we need to look at it holistically.
Right.
So if we are importing solar panels from China, we are as vulnerable as we are for oil imports. If we are importing batteries from China, we are as vulnerable. And China has shown the rest of the world in terms of its eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation with the US,
Yes,
that it has leverage. So the lesson for us is how do we take a medium to long-term strategic view and become self-reliant
yes.
in the new technologies?
But self-sufficiency, by its very definition, would perhaps be something that you plan for the future, right? And if it is the future, there is the 20-year horizon, and then there is the period beyond that. So how do you strategically do that, keeping both interests in mind, because it's so dynamic?
May I just come in that
Certainly.
Earlier thought that you need 20% is dated. So I'll give you an example of solar panels. 2005, the Germans were the leaders in manufacturing and in technology. By 2015, the Chinese had destroyed the German industry. So what China could do in 10 years, why can't we do in 5 or 7 years if we get the ambition and our act together?
Fair point. Fair point. Prasenjit Pal,
And,
you want to take that
and
point that is being made over here? Because it is doable that you can have both sides considered and a strategy that is laid out that would work for the period that we are talking about, where fossil fuels will still be required and we need that kind of security, and the period where we are going to move towards renewables much more away from fossil fuels.
No, absolutely right. What we need to do, as I said right at the beginning, coming back to what I said, that we have to have a basket kind of an approach. So if we are going to depend more on renewables, then we must have some sort of additional or dependable storage solutions. And now these dependable storage solutions need not necessarily be batteries. They could be pumped hydro. They could be any other type. In fact, we could even, dovetail the hydrogen economy to the energy sector in such a way that we do demand side management by generating hydrogen when there's power supply in excess because of excess renewables, and therefore try to manage the grid in that way. So it would be a very good option if we could perhaps use hydrogen production as a demand side management tool to manage the grid, in addition to the storage facilities, so that we are able to better incorporate the renewable energy that is abundant at certain hours of the day.
Right. So this diversification is very important from every perspective, whether it's the basket of energy resources that we are talking about, or even oil right now. Russia, Iran in the past, US, Saudi, all of them offer India more energy security when you diversify to that extent than solely relying on domestic drilling as well, which we are far from in any case. But this entire concept of diversification, where are we on that count? Sukrit Vijayakar.
We have got good ties with Iran, with Russia, with the US, etc. Before I take this on further, I'd like to comment on the licenses issue. You see, bidding for licenses is like pricing of an IPO. You can price an IPO like Paytm, which kind of sank without a trace, or you could have an IPO which is something like a lottery, which is what makes people cagey about bidding for that. You could probably have a revenue sharing kind of model, which would probably make it easier both on the government as well as on the bidder. Coming back to diversification, we are fairly diverse. Yes, we tend to prefer to procure from the Arab Gulf, but that is because the travel time is much less, which makes your working capital cycle lower.
So,
Recently, there was an item in the news about Venezuelan oil
yes.
replacing Iran. That is kind of hype. Venezuelan oil is of just one type, whereas Iranian oil is spreads across the spectrum.
Correct.
So the kind of oil Venezuela can provide is not the kind of oil that all Indian refineries can use to the tune of 100%.
Right. So if I have to wrap up this discussion, and which I need to do, but Prasenjit Pal, if India had to choose only one, energy independence or lowest cost energy, what should be the national priority? Short answers, if I may.
The national priority should obviously be energy independence, but then economy is going to play a very big role, and therefore it has to be energy security at the most economic possible basket solution.
Sukrit Vijayakar, at this point, is the push for more domestic drilling, you think, a strategic necessity, or has it become an emotional argument rather than an economic one?
It has become more of an emotional argument rather than an economic one. As I said, it is good to keep on doing it in the hope or really lottery lag jaya kind of thing, and we find some oil. But till then, all this refining capacity was built not with just a view to provide the domestic market, but also to export. India is a net exporter of products, which it wasn't at the start of this century. But with what Reliance did, what SR and then Naira did, what the public sector has done with new refineries coming over the past 10, 15 years, is it has made India self-sufficient in products. And to say that I will not buy crude, and let my refineries starve because I want to be energy independent does not make economic sense to me.
Pratyush Sinha, where do you stand on this entire argument of what we need to plan for the future in terms of where your interests lie as well when it comes to rare earths and magnets, as opposed to any kind of expansion in hydrocarbon exploration? Where do you think the focus needs to be right now towards greater security or perhaps managing our risks, whether they are now or in the future?
Sure. So, see, we know that the world is moving towards a certain kind of energy mix in the future, and we need to plan for that. We need to ensure that in that world, we don't suffer from the same kind of dependencies that we have had for the last few decades. We need to do that at a mission scale. And what that requires is a few things. One, we need to ensure that we're focusing on the entire value chain end to end. It shouldn't happen that we just do one part of the value chain and are then dependent on other parts of the value chain on other countries, whether that's China or Korea or even other allied countries. The second is we need to ensure that basically we have captive access to material. And that's the most important thing, because you cannot compete with China. You cannot compete with predatory pricing that comes from China if you're dependent on the open market long term. You need to ensure that a certain large percentage of your overall demand is met through captive sources, where the price is the price of taking the material out of the ground or taking the material, just collecting the material from scrap.
Right.
So when we can ensure these two things, the entire value chain, focus on the entire value chain and ensuring that we can get the feedstock at low cost, I think that the transition that we are talking about over 20 years or whatever period can be hastened a lot.
Right. So the point is this, that India needs affordable energy today and we need clean energy as well tomorrow. And the real challenge is balancing both without compromising our security, compromising our economy, or indeed our climate. So whether drilling more is the answer or smarter diversification is the way forward, like we discussed, at least one thing turns out to be clear, that India cannot afford to get its energy strategy wrong at this time. It's a crucial juncture where we are at, looking at all the geopolitical risks that have been stated and restated. Thank you to my guests for joining us with your sharp insights. Prasenjit Pal, Sukrit Vijayakar, Pratyush Sinha and Ajay Shankar. Thank you indeed for sharing your views with us on the big question. Indeed, the question has been raised because of that post on X by Vedanta chairman Anil Agarwal, whether India needs to pursue more oil exploration, whether we can, whether we have the resources, and whether or not we should, even as the world is moving towards the renewables. If that is going to be our call right now, to be able to get our energy security perspective right, it's going to be an important question to answer. And we'll keep raising it until we do find the answers. I'm Vikram Oza from me and everyone here on The Big Question. Good evening.